you can have.
Main event of the evening.
Ready to race to you.
These days are
Hello and welcome to These Days Are Ours, a Happy Days podcast. I'm Peter.
And I'm Joe.
And today, we will be discussing Season 4, Episode 6, Fonzie's Hero.
Okay, Peter, tell us what happens in Fonzie's Hero.
We open at Arnold's, where Richie and Ralph are discussing Ralph's car trouble.
Rich, I'm driving along in my car, and all of a sudden it started making these weird noises.
What noises?
Kapet, kapet, kapet. Then...
Only to be distracted by a pretty girl. Ralph hits on her by telling her he starts college in the fall. The sound of sirens from outside causes Al, wearing a helmet, to run out of the kitchen, shouting about an air raid. Richie tells him it was just a fire engine going by. Al is disappointed. He rarely gets to wear the helmet. Then he stops Ralph from hitting on the girl. She's his niece, Gina. As Al escorts Gina out, in stumbles Fonzie, wearing his coveralls and covered in soot. He narrowly escaped a fire in the garage, and he recounts how if a guy hadn't pulled him out, he'd be dead by now. He doesn't know who did it. 1 minute, a pair of hands were pulling him out of the smoke, and the next thing he knew, he was flat on his back on the sidewalk. Then a fireman tried to give him a kiss. Richie says that was probably mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, which Fonzie claims he knew. He just should have told Fonzie before he dented the fireman's helmet. All Fonzie knows about the guy who saved his life is that he was wearing a Jefferson jacket, and whatever favor he wants from Fonzie, he gets. As Ralph goes to get more water for Fonzie, in stumbles Potsie, wearing a Jefferson jacket and covered in soot. Ralph jokes about Potsie's father making him clean the chimney again, then realizes Potsie was in the fire too, and gives him the water. Richie says Potsie is the one who saved Fonzie's life, much to Fonzie's horror. Potsie recounts how he passed the garage and heard screams.
Then I heard screams! Maybe not screams.
Well, maybe not screams. Then ran in and saved the Fonz's life. Fonzie gets up and hugs Potsie. He does tell Potsie to knock it off when Potsie tries to hug him. Fonzie tells Potsie he did good, and whatever favor he wants, he's got. Also, he should go wash up. He looks like Smokey the Bear. Fonzie mentions that if it wasn't for Potsie, he'd be like Ralph's car right now. Ralph, realizing his car was in the fire, runs out.
Oh no, my car!
That night at the Cunningham house, Marion is finishing up a piano lesson with a little girl named Vicky, as Howard is waiting for her so they can go to Joni's school's open house. As Joni helps Vicky put her coat on, Marion tells Howard sometimes she wishes they had a little one around the house. Howard tells her,
Well, we got 10 minutes, Marion.
Richie and Fonzie come in. Richie asks if Potsie came by yet, and explains that Fonzie feels he owes Potsie a favor, since Potsie saved his life. According to Fonzie, it's the Fonzarelli code. A man saves your life. Any favor he asks, you gotta answer it. Like Fonzie's Uncle Vito had his leg saved by a little person, so every time there was a parade in town, Vito had to put the little person on his shoulders. As they leave for Joni's open house, Marion asks what Joni's project was. Joni says she wrote a composition.
My parents are still frisky.
Howard and Marion, horrified, decide that if Joni reads it in front of the entire auditorium, they'll move. Potsie arrives with Ralph. Since Ralph's car is totaled, Potsie's giving him a ride home, on his sister's bike. Fonzie asks what Potsie wants. A new thermos for his lunchbox? A new bell for his bike? Ralph suggests a date with the Aloha Pussycats. But Potsie doesn't want any of those things. He thought about it, and he picked something that means a lot to him. He wants to pal around with Fonzie. Fonzie and Potsie, together, all the time. Fonzie assures Potsie they are pals. And wouldn't Potsie rather have something more exciting, like a piano? But no, Potsie wants to be Fonzie's special pal. Kids do things with their fathers. Ralph and his dad go fishing, Richie and his dad have the sex talk.
Yeah, but he got most of it wrong anyway.
And now Potsie wants to do everything he never got to do with his father with Fonzie. He's got a great idea for Tuesday night. Bumper cars. And next week, they can go roller skating, despite Fonzie saying he doesn't skate. Fonzie asks if he wouldn't rather have a date with the Aloha Pussycats. Potsie says to bring them along, and rushes out. Ralph asks if Fonzie's afraid to skate. Fonzie says that if the man upstairs meant for them to skate, they'd be born with little wheels on their feet.
If the Creator had meant for us to roll around the countryside, we'd have been born with wheels.
The following week at the roller rink, Potsie, Ralph, and Richie skate in. Ralph and Richie chase after a girl who split her seam, while Potsie waits for Fonzie, who has to hold on to various objects so as not to fall over. Potsie says he can't believe Fonzie didn't skate as a child. Fonzie says he was never a child. Potsie tries to show Fonzie how to skate, then glides off to find chicks for tonight. Ralph skates over to tell Fonzie that Potsie showed them his circus pictures. He looked so cute with his little clown hat and balloons. Fonzie lunges at Ralph and topples over. He also mentions that yesterday he went to Potsie's family reunion.
Wall-to-wall Potsies.
Potsie comes back and skates right into Fonzie. He saw some cute chicks on the other side of the rink, and he and Ralph go to talk to them. Fonzie isn't alone for long, though, because 3 children come over to make fun of him for not knowing how to skate. As they skate away, Fonzie says that if kids can do this and Potsie can do this, he can do this. He manages to skate from one end of the fence to the other with minimal trouble. A pretty girl skates by, and Fonzie falls down. She offers to give him some lessons, and he says if she takes off her skates, he'll give her some lessons. She says his lessons sound like more fun, and then Potsie interrupts and shoos her away.
Oh, excuse me, pal. Here, out of the way, I'll help my pal. I'll help him out.
Alright. He helps Fonzie up, then skates after the girl to bring her back, leaving Fonzie in the middle of the rink with nothing to hold on to. After almost getting stampeded by a group of skaters, he calls over a guy and makes him pull Fonzie out. A later night at Arnold's, Fonzie has snuck in to avoid Potsie seeing him. He pulls Richie into his office and says he has to find some way to stop this. Everywhere he goes, there's Potsie. It's like having gum on his shoe. Richie doesn't really see the problem. Potsie's a pretty nice guy, but he suggests Fonzie break the Fonzarelli code. Fonzie says it's not just the code. He needs his space. Richie says Fonzie should tell Potsie to pick something else. Maybe he'll choose the Aloha Pussycats. Fonzie's not convinced. Potsie might choose to be his roomie. It looks like Fonzie is stuck helping Potsie relive his childhood. Richie leaves, and then Fonzie, and then Potsie leaves the stall he was in. Richie comes back in for a moment, and realizes Potsie heard everything.
Wait, I just came to get the...
Potsie leaves the restroom and joins Fonzie at his booth. He tells Fonzie he really appreciates Fonzie letting him hang around. He never had a big brother or anything like that. They've had a lot of fun together, which is why it's hard for Potsie to tell him they can't hang around anymore. Potsie needs his room. They can still be friends. After all, if Potsie was stuck in a fire, Fonzie would save his life too. Fonzie doesn't owe him anything anymore. Fonzie gets up and leaves for a date, after giving Potsie a thumbs up. Richie joins Potsie and tells him he's alright. He suggests they go down to the gym and play basketball, but Potsie's not in the mood. Fonzie comes back over with the Aloha Pussycats, all 6 of them. He asks Potsie if he has one more friend night in him, which Potsie does.
3 for me and 3 for you?
Well, don't get excited.
A little later, Richie complains to Al that all those guys ever seem to think about is chicks. There's other things, like sports or cooking. They sit quietly for a minute, then Richie asks if Al has another niece. Al does not.
Thank you, Peter. That was Fonzie's Hero, which first aired back on October 26, 1976. That night, Happy Days served as a lead-in to a brand new Laverne and Shirley featuring guest appearances by Ron Howard as Richie and Anson Williams as Potsie. Over on NBC, Kent McCord was guest starring on Baa Black Sheep as an American fighter pilot brainwashed by the Japanese. And CBS was running a special called Holiday on Ice with Olympic figure skater Peggy Fleming.
Singular sensation, every step she takes. One thrilling observation, every move that she makes.
And since this was late October, I can only imagine that the holiday in question must have been Halloween. Fonzie's Hero was directed by my hero, Jerry Paris, and it was written by the team of Barry Rabinowitz and Stephen Dworman. Barry had previously co-authored Fonzie the Salesman. He was a prolific TV writer as well as a 1994 Jeopardy champion. But for Stephen, this was his only credit in episodic television. Steve is much better known for his work in marketing and advertising, and he made long-form commercials with such notables as John Cleese and Hugh Downs. In 2001, Steve wrote, directed, and starred in something called Divorce, the Musical. And he actually has been divorced twice. As for guest stars this week, no real main guest characters. The kids at the roller rink are played by Gary Marshall's real-life kids, Scott and Kathleen, and you might remember them from Haunted in Season 2. And that third kid is Tom Bosley's daughter, Amy, now known as Amy Bayer. She's grown up to be a producer. She produced such films as Last Vegas and Mary Shelley. So, Peter, did you have any particular feelings about the kids at the roller rink?
Few things are as delightful as seemingly untouchable characters being made fun of by small children. It was great. They were great. They gave a great performance. Few things will be as funny to me as these small children taunting the fawns for not being able to skate with neener, neener, neener.
He doesn't know how to skate. Nah, 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 nah.
Imagine that opportunity to get to be the kids who get to insult Fonzie right to his face on the number one show on television. So Scott and Kathleen and Amy all did great. As for songs this week, we have Personality by Lloyd Price. Entry of the Gladiators is performed briefly by Donnie Most. It was a military march written in 1897 by Czech composer Julius Ernest Wilhelm Fuchik to evoke the glory days of the Roman Empire, but within a few short years, it was commonly associated with circuses and clowns. At the roller rink, we hear The Blue Danube, a waltz composed by Johann Strauss of Austria in 1866. Buttons and Bows is heard in instrumental form. It was originally written in 1947 for the Bob Hope film The Pale Face. Among many singers who had a hit with this song was Betty Garrett, a.k.a. Edna Babish of Laverne and Shirley.
Yeah.
East is east and west is west, and the wrong one I have chose. Let's go where I'll keep on wearing those frills and flowers and buttons and bows, rings and things and buttons and bows.
We also hear I'm Popeye the Sailor Man, written in 1933 by Sammy Lerner. Back at Arnold's, we hear Pretend by Nat King Cole. The next musical selection was a little maudlin for my taste. It was an instrumental version of Smile, originally written by Charlie Chaplin in 1936 for the film Modern Times. Audiences today probably associate that song with the 2019 film Joker. At the end of the episode, Aloha Oi is again performed by Henry Winkler, the second time this season. It's also performed by Ron Howard and Al Molinaro at the very, very end of the episode.
And once again, it's being used to herald the fact that they are going to do things with the Aloha Pussycats, which still feels kind of exploitative. Like, come on. Use a song that is not about Hawaii's loss of autonomy.
As for cultural historical references of the week, we've talked about civil defense before in our review of Be the First in Your Block. Basically, Cold War tensions running high in the 1950s. People thought war with Russia could break out any time. So the government created the Federal Civil Defense Administration to instruct the public on what to do in case of a foreign attack. Among other things, it involved practice air raids. And based on his official-looking helmet that he wears, Al Del Vecchio has taken on the responsibility of being a civil defense warden. That's a volunteer tasked with organizing, guiding, and controlling the general public during an emergency. Smokey Bear has been the mascot of the U.S. Forest Service since 1950. He's often referred to as Smokey the Bear because of a popular song.
Smokey the Bear, growling and a-growling and a-sniffing in the air. He can find a fire before it starts to flame. That's why they call him Smokey. That was how he got his name.
But the Forest Service insists that it's just Smokey Bear. Under any name, he's famous for his catchphrase, "Only you can prevent forest fires," which was recently updated, I did not know this, to "Only you can prevent wildfires." There's a reference to Huckleberry Hound. Huckleberry Hound was another cartoon creation of William Hanna and Joseph Barbera, supposedly based on Andy Griffith. Huckleberry got his own syndicated TV show in 1958.
Concern, crows. Uh-oh. Them corny crows are coming in for the attack.
And there was a Huckleberry Hound lunchbox in 1961, but Huck had to share it with Yogi Bear, Quick Draw McGraw, and other characters. America saw a boom in roller rinks after World War II. In the 1940s and 50s, roller rinks, like the one in this episode, typically had a live organist on hand to play music. This was phased out in the late 50s and early 60s in favor of recorded music. Pinky Lee, we've talked about before. He was a high-energy vaudeville comedian turned children's show host, very popular in the 50s and known for his lisp and his checkered suit. And Roy Rogers, we've also discussed before, born Leonard Sly in Cincinnati in 1911. He was an immensely popular singing cowboy who found fame in movies, on TV, and in records in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Trigger was the golden palomino owned by Rogers from the 30s to the 60s. And yes, Roy had Trigger stuffed. You can visit Trigger in Branson, Missouri today if you're so inclined.
You sick monsters.
Some people want to do it. I did find one article from a newspaper in New Zealand that includes counting as one of Trigger's many skills, but there is no footage of this and no other corroboration, so I don't think Trigger knows how to count.
Well, I mean, he's dead now, so...
Well, he's dead now, but I don't think he did know how to count. Other observations this week, Ralph mentions going to college in the fall, so I guess this is their senior year, and yes, they are graduating from high school later in the season. Personally, I'm just amazed that time passes for anyone except Joni.
Yes, we are finally slowly moving out of the time warp that has engulfed Happy Days from the beginning.
Yep, even Ralph and Richie and Potsie are allowed to age. One of the classic sitcom tropes, and we see it in this episode, is to have one character save the life of the other character, and then become a burden to that person. By sitcom rules, Fonz could have stopped all of this by saving Potsie's life in return somehow. I thought that was where this episode was going, but that's not where it goes.
Instead, it just got depressing.
Yeah, it did. They went in a sadder direction. For a moment, I freaked out that they had actually killed off Ralph's car.
Well, they finally did it. They killed my fucking car.
Keep in mind that Ralph drives the iconic Happy Days car, the yellow hot rod with the flames on the side from the opening theme song. But I think there is a reference to the car being repaired by the end of the episode.
So Ralph will no longer have to get rides on Potsie's sister's bike.
I wish we could have seen that. That sounded actually pretty funny.
Yeah, and come to think of it, this is the second time we've had reference to Potsie's sister. She was mentioned once in an episode of season 1. Potsie borrowed her mascara for one of the demon dares. So Potsie's sister, at this time, still exists.
And do we ever get to meet her on camera?
I don't think we do. I think this might be the last time that she's mentioned. I think from now on, Potsie is going to be an only child.
Well, that's kind of sad. She went to the same place where Chuck went.
Yep. At least she got away from Potsie's dad, who we kind of get more of an indication about what Potsie's home life is like. First, when Ralph jokes that Potsie's dad makes him clean the chimney, and then when we find out that there's lots of things that Potsie never got to do with his father, and now he wants to do them with Fonzie.
Yeah, so maybe it's better that Potsie's sister actually got out of that.
Non-existence is preferable to whatever this was.
Living in the Weber household. Marion in this episode is giving piano lessons.
We're just about through with Vicky's piano lesson.
Can I be finished now?
Since when does she do this? As of The Best Man in season 1, Marion was a pretty bad piano player, so I don't know that she should be giving lessons.
Maybe this is another retcon from the first 2 seasons, or maybe Marion has just been practicing a lot.
Yeah, maybe The Best Man inspired her to get better.
Yeah.
Another mention of Jenny Piccolo this week. She's not going to get here for several years, but they're keeping her alive off screen.
Mm-hmm.
Is it charming or disturbing that Joni is so enthusiastic about her parents' sex life?
Disturbing. It's disturbing. It's very disturbing.
Okay. I just wanted a definitive answer on that.
Do you think Joni was joking about writing an entire composition about her parents getting frisky? Or do you think that she actually wrote that and she was going to read it in front of everyone just to humiliate her parents? Or do you think it was just a little joke to make her parents uncomfortable for a brief moment?
I think she might actually go through with it. I think Joni is the kind of person who might actually go through with that.
She's an agent of chaos.
This episode is a deep dive into the sad spectacle that is Potsie Weber's life. We've not yet met Potsie's father. I don't think we ever will, and maybe it's best that we don't. Potsie is clearly a young man in crisis, so maybe we need to grade him on a curve. But on the other hand, I was thinking about this. Fonzie had an objectively worse childhood.
Yep.
And he even says in this episode, I was never a child, which he wasn't, since he was forced to grow up at such a young age. So yeah, Potsie obviously had a bad childhood, but Fonz, I think, objectively had a worse one.
Well, everyone copes with trauma in their own ways, and who can say whose trauma is more valid than anyone else's?
Yeah, I guess that there are different kinds of trauma that you can go through, so everybody's going through something.
Yeah. Happy days!
Happy days are
Henry Winkler is not necessarily thought of as a physical comedian, but he does pretty well with some slapsticky material in this episode. He gets to do a little bit of physical comedy.
Yes.
It's funny to see him fall down and be very clumsy and awkward at the roller rink. Ralph Mouth is on his worst behavior this week, taking gleeful pleasure in Fonzie's misery. And he's just generally written as a jerk in this episode, intentionally tripping the girls at the roller rink and on and on. What I thought was hypocritical about Ralph is that he is taking pleasure in the nerdiness and immaturity of Potsie. But who is he to be making these judgments? I mean, he's every bit as bad as Potsie, so...
It's the loss of his car, I guess.
Yeah, that did bring out the worst in him. I did not expect the Aloha Pussycats to be a runner on this show, but they are. This week we actually get to see them, which I didn't expect any of that, because normally the show is not big on continuity.
Nope.
And the Aloha Pussycats, I thought they were a joke that was made in one episode. I thought they would kind of drop it. Nope.
Yep, they definitely exist.
So, were there any outstanding Happy Days fashions this week?
Not really, no. But I do wish we could have seen that picture of Fonzie in the clown hat with the balloon. That sounded great. Can you just imagine it, like, Potsie's in the picture too, and he's just smiling obliviously, and Fonzie is just staring at the camera, wishing for the sweet embrace of death?
That would have been a great visual joke, and they should have actually done it. So, did you have any other observations that you wanted to make about Fonzie's hero?
Is this the most depressing episode of season 4 yet? Because like we talked about, this entire episode is basically just about how both Potsie and Fonzie had deeply dysfunctional childhoods, and they're both coping with that in some very unhealthy ways. Like, Potsie is trying to get Fonzie to be his older brother / father figure, and Fonzie just avoids anything that could be construed as childishness. and overcompensates with displays of machismo. I kind of enjoyed how this episode was basically just all about something very, very depressing in this sitcom format. Maybe it didn't handle it as well as it could have, but yeah, I liked how this episode was secretly just super depressing. I don't know if that was intentional, but it's definitely there.
And keep in mind that it starts with Al Del Vecchio thinking that there's an air raid.
Air raid! Air raid! Don't panic, this is just a drill. Everybody head for the basement.
Ow. A fire engine went by, that's all.
So it reminds you of the darker side of the 1950s, which was school kids ducking and covering under their desks in fear of a Russian air attack.
Duck and cover. Duck and cover. He did what we all must learn to do. You and you and you and you. Duck and cover.
So it starts the episode off on a nice dark note. It really gets to the dark underside of the Potsie Weber character and a little bit of the Arthur Fonzarelli character. And I really found it revealing when Fonzie says, as a joke, I was never a child. He means that kind of flippantly, but there's some truth to it. There's some ugly truth to it, in fact. Even though the show is called Happy Days, they're not afraid to steer it in some darker direction.
Although they don't really engage with it as much as they probably could. I mean, not that they necessarily should, because this is a sitcom.
Well, as we saw in Fonzie Loves Pinky Part 3, because this is a show called Happy Days, they really feel the need to steer it towards a happy ending, even when they shouldn't. Fonzie Loves Pinky Part 3 should have ended on a down note, and yet they tack on this silly ending about Fonzie going on a date with twins and Richie dangling his feet off the motorcycle, and so that they can go into that "these are such happy days" thing at the end of the episode. And here, they could have just had basically Potsie sacrificing himself. Oh, I'm the one who can't hang out with you. And then they are both allowed to save face, and then Fonzie goes off to live his life, and Potsie just has to kind of sit there and be sad. But then they bring in the Aloha Pussycats. It's very much the equivalent of that conversation that they had at the end of Fonzie Loves Pinky Part 3, where they have to bring in something goofy and silly at the end of the episode. This is a show called Happy Days, and it's supposed to be a cheerful show, so it's not meant to dwell on the darker side of life, at least not for very long. But I will ask you that age-old, timeless question, was this episode any good?
Yeah, it's not my favorite of season 4, but there are some very amusing jokes in it, and I liked that it showed us more of the dark psychological undercurrent of some of our favorite characters, and also Potsie. So, yeah, it's a fun one. It might be the weakest episode of season 4 so far, but it's still pretty good.
I enjoyed it too, mainly for the reasons that you mentioned. It does give us some insight into Potsie Weber and the emptiness in his life that makes him act the way that he does. They could have gone, as you say, they could have gone a little further with it. I thought it was a little bit lame to have that "Smile Though Your Heart Is Breaking" song playing on the soundtrack. I thought that was a little much.
Yeah, it's a lot like the Full House sad music.
Full House was one of those sitcoms that emerged from the production company that started to make Happy Days.
Yeah.
And so that sentimentality, I don't mind sadness and sentimentality, but they were layering on just a little bit thick.
Yeah, it starts to feel kind of emotionally manipulative.
Yeah, and after all, this is Potsie here, who is kind of a vacant person, so I don't know that there's a lot of emotional depth to him, but I like that they at least tried to give him something this week. It is kind of funny seeing Potsie and Fonzie have to hang out together and Fonzie being annoyed with him. It wasn't my favorite so far this season, but it was enjoyable and interesting nevertheless. So, Peter, tell the people how they can keep up with us and find out about what we are doing.
Listeners can follow us on Twitter at Fonzie Podcast. They can follow me on Twitter at Sphericals. That's SFERICALS.
And they can follow me on Twitter at Joe_A_Blevins. They can find this podcast online at thesedaysaroours.libsyn.com. And they can email us with questions, comments, and concerns at thesedaysarOursPodcast@gmail.com. So, Peter, what do we have on the docket for next week?
Next week, Richie pretends that Fonzie's apartment is his apartment to impress a girl. Hijinks ensue.
Oh, that sounds like a really fun one. So, see you later, alligator.
In a while, crocodile.
I am the god of hellfire, and I bring you fire. I'll take you to burn. Fire. I'll take you to learn. I'll see you burn. You fought hard and you saved and earned, but all of it's gone to burn.
Creator had meant for us to roll around the countryside, we'd have been born with wheels.